Alright, yeah, it's cutting my head off, but don't worry about that. What I'm going to do right now, I'm going to get a measurement for my, my panel. Now we know the width of the panel will be the same as the rail, minus 1/8 of an inch for expansion contraction. So we have 18 1/16, so the panel is going to be 17 15/16 wide. That's 1/8 of an inch less than the width of the rail. And the height of it, now normally I don't sit here doing this way. I normally just do my math when I'm doing my layout on my cutout, my cut list. But just for shits and giggles. Alright, I've got my bottom rail, my top rail, and they're flush. So I'm going to measure the distance from inside my cut here to here, which is 21 7/8. And again, I want 1/8 of an inch less for expansion and contraction, so 1/8 off of 21 7/8 is 21 3/4. Alright, so that means my panel is going to be 17 15/16 wide by 21 3/4 high. Alright, so let's go get that cut up next. Alright, I've already got my pen set up on my slider, and I'm going to run out the panel. I'm going to use some double refined MDF on here, which is a higher grade of MDF, means medium density fiberboard. This is double refined, which means it's a lot smaller particles and it's compressed a lot tighter, and it's excellent to spray. Alright. Squared up the edge before I ripped it. Sometimes the back of the edges are kind of out of square a little bit, or maybe they're beat up in transport or whatever. So you always want to square up. You never want to cut from the back of the edge. I'm just going to double check here. That should be 17 15/16 by 21 3/4. Which I am. So now we're going to run this to the shaper. I got to rabbet out the edge because my panel can only be 3/4 of an inch thickness, at least a tab going in, because my sticking cope runs at a 1/4 inch slot all the way around, and this material is 3/8, so I've got to rabbet out an edge all the way around to bring the 3/8 down to 1/4 of an inch, and we're going to do that in here, back into the shaper room, or the tool mesh room, whatever you want to call it. I set up a shaper just dedicated to just doing the stick, the rabbeting edge for my panels, because we do so many shaper style doors anymore. I used to run the rabbet on a table saw, which was a pain in the neck. Then I set up a handheld router with a fence, and I used to rabbet that way. But the problem with that is, when you're using a router, you're working from the top. And I want to leave exactly 1/4 of an inch. And with a router, you're working from the wrong side. If there's a fluctuation or difference in the thickness of the material, you got to constantly changing your router depth. So by setting up a shaper dedicated just to doing this rabbeted edge, I've eliminated the chance of having my tenons thicker or thinner than I'm looking for. Now this double refined is beautiful material. Can't believe how nice it comes up with paint on it. Here's what I'm doing. You can see here I'm putting a 1/2 inch deep by 1/4 inch thick tenon. so that rabbet is all the way around. So now it's going to fit into my this is the face. I'll write back on here. That's the back of the panel. So this will be the face, and now we're going to go sand things and then put that panel together. Yeah, this is one of those Powermatic 27s. It has a 5 horsepower 220 single phase motor on it. It's an older machine. It's only got a 3/4 spindle, which is all you need with the cutter. All I have is a it's a carbide insert tooling on here, and I made up this wooden fence. Let me get this. You can see this. Make sure your fingers. One of these days I'm going to put a cover over top of that. But what this does, it goes through here, and you notice your fingers can never get down into where the cutters are. All right, by making this wooden fence on here. I've screwed this fence down to the tabletop. All I did was tap it, drill and tap it, and put some 1/4 inch bolts down in there. And I mean, it doesn't require, it's not rocket science. You don't need a lot here. You can see this protective guard here, finger guard I call it. I had to drill a hole so I can access the hold down bolts on the fence. And I built this up. It's sitting a 1/2 inch off the deck, so what I did, I connected, I put a couple pieces of 1/2 inch material underneath on each side, and then I closed it all off, and you can see here how I bolted this plastic connector here on for the dust collection. So it does a pretty decent job. Like I said though, as you're rabbeting, it's leaving this opening here, so that's causing dust to shoot through here, come out, and there's no real way to stop that. And it's not necessary. It makes a little dust in here, but hell, that's what we're all about, right? Making dust. All right, so let's go in here now. I'll grab this. By the way, this material is all recycled wood sitting here. This material here, these old drawers here, and this couple of timbers here. We're going to be recycling those and using them for parts of a kitchen that we're building. I'm just going to sand these things real quick. I always like to sand things under the lights, with the light shining across the grain. It enables me to see maybe some scratches or gouges or nicks or defects or whatever that might not show with just an overhead light. Probably doesn't look that good on. Oh, by the way, I'm using a 120 grit. All right. The way this comes out of the shaper cutter, it's pretty clean. But maybe it's burnished just a little bit, which makes it almost too polished. I like to rough it up just a little bit with a 120 grit. That gives my chance for my primer lacquers, my undercoaters, to get a better bite into the wood. All right. So my sealer will adhere better if I sand these with a 120 grit. Don't ever go over a 150 grit. Sometimes I use 150 depending on what the species of wood is. But 120 to 150 is a good. Don't go to 180, 220, 200 or 400 or whatever. You shine up your wood too much and your lacquer's not going to get a good adhesion to the wood. So that's what I'm doing there. Now I'm going to just sand this at 120. Let me make sure I'm putting these together. I looked at the grain, the direction of the grain and all, where the heart part of the tree was, all that. I look at different, which I'm not going to get into right now, but there's a reason why this one might be the left and that one the right one, because again, I pay attention to the grain, direction of grain, what part of the tree it was cut out of or whatever. That's all important. And right now I don't have time to get into it, but the point I want to make is I'm rushing here, so I'm maybe not covering every point because I need to get this done. The client, like I said, needs it in a rush. And I was supposed to have it done the other day, and I had a problem with my box fan. I need to get this assembled and get prime painted. Get the undercoats on so I get it, allow enough time for it to dry and get the finish coats on and get the thing delivered and installed today. So if I seem like I'm in a bit of a rush and not explaining things as much as you'd like me to, well, that's the reason. Now a lot of people watch YouTube videos and they're not really aware of what it takes actually to produce a video. Now, if I was retired and had all the time in the world, I can make a much better video than what I do. But I'm in business, you know, and time is money. So, and it takes a lot of time to record and make a decent video. And again, I'm not trying to be a professional Steven Spielberg here or something like that. I just have terrible lighting, and the composition on my viewfinder is not the best, and sometimes my head's cut off and the camera's not aiming where it belongs, and you may be not hearing everything I'm saying. I'm not sure right now if you're even hearing it well. So it takes a lot of time away from doing the project itself to concentrate on what it takes to do the recording and make the video itself up. So, because this is really a job that I'm doing and I'm recording it, videos might not be as professional as others you might see on YouTube. Okay? And you know what? I don't care. All I'm doing is just trying to have a little bit of fun here and kind of showing you all what we do in this shop and how to do some of this stuff, all right? And if it doesn't come across as a finished, spectacular piece that's going to make the Academy Awards, I don't give a shit. Because this is just old Mikey in a sawdust-filled shop doing what I do, right? I'm good at making cabinets and doing woodwork. And I would like the videos to be nice for you. But again, this is a woodworking shop here. It's not really a studio, right? But I think you can get the gist of what I'm doing. To get back into the cabinet end of this video, you want to make sure your rails are flush with the tops, with the outside edges of your stiles. And you want to make sure that the clamp is parallel to the, you don't want to be at an angle because that could pull this out of square, all right? And like I said, I have allowed 1/8 of an inch to make sure this comes up square. But at the same time, you want to do everything you can to ensure that it is as square as it can be. I gotta get a wet rag. Give me a minute. You want to squeeze the excess. You want it slightly damp, but I want to get rid of all this. This is Franklin Type On 2 that I'm using, which is pretty much my go-to glue in this shop. I use epoxy for all my exterior work. I use the West system. But 99% of everything I glue up in this shop is done with Type On 2. I have used the regular Type On, the Type On 1. And you save a little money. It's a little less money than the Type On 2. But I'll tell you what, the difference in cost is kind of negligible. doing is I'm kind of centering the panel, which is not that critical because you never really see the back of this panel. So this little reveal that you're seeing around the perimeter of that rabbet, if this was a door, that would be real critical to make sure that's even all the way around, but it's not in this case. And again, because I'm using a double refined material here, expansion and contraction is not really a critical issue because the MDF doesn't really expand and contract much. All right. Now I'm using a square just to check, and I knew I didn't have to because I cut these on a slider, which makes a perfectly square cut on the ends of the rails, and then because they're wide enough, when you tighten them up, they almost square themselves up perfectly. Now, if you didn't have a real square cut on the ends, either because your slider is off or your radial arm, whatever you're using to cut these to length, if that's off, or if you're cutting a little square when you run across a shaper, if that's cutting out a square a little bit, that'll make the door overall store size out of square. So I like to try to be as square as I can get when I assemble this. And now I don't normally use 9/16 pins or staples. Because I don't want to see those big holes on the back of a door. But this is not a door, this is a dishwasher panel, so you're never going to see the back. So on a door I use the 23mm pins for this. Alright, but they don't hold quite as good as a staple does, and these are galvanized staples, by the way. Grab really good, all right? And the reason you saw me move this clamp is because that's a wide rail. That's 5 3/8 wide rail. So the clamp really didn't pull the whole width. So I do it in 2 spots. I pull the top together, fasten it, and then move the clamp so I get the whole thing pulled tight, all right? So here you go. We've got this thing secured together. All right. And now it's important to get all that squeeze out glue which again, this is going to be painted, not painted, I'm going to spray it with a conversion lacquer which has very good moisture protection, all right? But because it is a paint, a solid color going on here, I'm not worried too much about this glue and the water leaving any kind of grain razor or something in here. You want to get the glue out of there, but if this was going to be stained, wood that was going to be stained, and this was solid wood instead of a double refined, and I was getting glue all over it and smearing it around with a wet rag, that's going to cause blotching when I stain it. So I would be doing a different procedure here with the glue. I would be a lot more careful on my squeeze out, and I would be a lot more careful on how I'm taking this rag and getting it onto the wood, because moisture, water, any kind of liquid does raise the grain of material when it hits it, a wood material, and when it raises the grain, that's going to affect the finish that you put on. All right. Now what I also do, just in case down underneath, if there's a little glue that I couldn't get to, I blow it back in. Because my cutout here is not a square cutout where I have that 1/4 inch slot for the tenon. And what it is, it's what's called an eased edge. It's rounded, so okay. And I like that because what happens a lot of times, if a panel or a rail or stile does shrink or expand a little bit, and you've put your finish on after with no primers underneath on that tenon, if this wood shrinks back a little, and that's a square edge right there, you might see where the wood shrunk back and it doesn't have a finish applied. All right, well, by having that edge eased a little bit, my lacquer gets back under there a little bit, so this thing could expand and contract up to a 1/16 of an inch, and with that eased edge back down there, it's not going to be quite so noticeable. All right. Now, a lot of times I will apply my primer coats, or if I'm staining, I will put my stain on my panel before I assemble the door, which helps twofold. It like I said, it makes sure that if the panel shrinks a little bit, they're still going to have color to it. So you won't see that line where it shrinks away from the frame, number one. Number two, if the finish or the stain or the color is applied first, there's going to be less chance of blotching or discoloration from the stain. I mean from the water, from the rag. Now because I know this has been already disc sanded with the 120 disc, and I did get this wood wet in the corners, so I'm going to go over where that wet was, and I'm going to knock down that little bit of raised grain where the wet rag touched the surface of this double refined panel. Because if I didn't do this and I go to put my lacquer, my undercoaters on, that's going to take the finish a little bit different than the area that's dry around, surrounding it, that never got touched by the wet, damp rag. And again, I'm hitting the edges of the beading on the stiles and the rails for the same reason. I do have all the glue off, because if you left glue on there, the lacquer does not want to stick to that glue. So if you got a little bead of glue in there, and when you go to spray it, the lacquer is not going to adhere to it. And when you go to sand your finish, it's going to jump off of there. So there you go. You can see the reveal all the way around for the panel. All right, and there's my bead, my frame. This was in the packet that came with the dishwasher, and it tells you what you have to do as far as making this panel and how to secure it to the dishwasher. And I real quick went over this, and so what I'm going to do, it was a little befuddling and confusing to me. I couldn't quite make sense out of everything. They got pictures of what to do and what not to do. Like here, there's a picture of a drill. Let me come over here, you can see. I don't know if you can see it or not. Picture with a drill. Now you say, what does that mean? Don't drill? Why not drill? Well, let's say, for instance, they're showing you, depending on what type of an edge treatment you might have on your panel or your door, if there's a recess like this or something, you don't want to drill and be putting a screw where that goes in, because the screw will come out into the handle hole or whatever. So, anyway, there's a lot of directions on here. It tells you there's some metal clips and different screws and some plastic clips and some spacers, and there's all kinds of crap going on here. But basically, I've got to lay this and tape this onto the door, and it's showing me where to drill some pilot holes on the four corners and then down on each side. And then down here, there's a couple of metal clips that I have to fasten on. And so if I tape this to it, if all goes well, if I tape this onto my panel, well, to the back of the panel, and I use those marks for the pilot holes, when I go over to the job, I should be able to just screw it on. Sounds easy, right? No. You got to take half the door. I looked at the back, I opened the door, looked at the back of it, and there's no hole showing anywhere. There's all kinds of trim and everything on the door itself, and you got to remove all that stuff to get access to the screws that screw the panel on, and then put all that trim back on again. So I looked this over, I read everything I could, and I made the decision that I'm going back to college, And in 2 years, when I get my master's degree, I'm going to come back, and at that time I should be able to get a basic understanding of what I'm supposed to do here. Not so much drilling the pilot holes, that's pretty cut and dry. But as far as how to take that damn door apart to get to the screws to secure my panel to it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to let this sit for about an hour. And then I'm going to run it through the wide belt sander, cut it the exact size, put the finished sanding to it, and get primer on it, all right? Before I put the primer on, I will tape this to the back of the panel and I'll drill those pilot holes, all right? And hopefully I'll understand and do exactly what I'm supposed to, because again, I think you need a master's degree to understand. This is like if you ever bought a toy for your kid or something you had to put together, or you buy one of those pre-made bookcases or something in your house, or the swing set that goes in the backyard and they give you 37 cages like this and 6 bags of nuts and bolts and washers and all kinds of shit, and you put it all there, and then you spread the stuff all out on the floor in your patio and your bedroom, your living room or whatever, and you go to put it together and you're scratching your head, and your wife comes in and she's laughing at you, and you get mad at her and tell her to go to hell, and then you kick the damn bag and the screws and the bolts and the washers and everything's all over the place because it drives me crazy.